Díagwich a Cartas Ganan and welcome to the Irish Film London podcast season 2. I'm your host, Niamh Branigan, and today I'm going to be joined by the wonderful people who were behind the making of Irish language film Doineann. The director Damien McCann joins me with actors Peter Coonan, Brennan, Seán Meallaigh and Clare Monnelly. Enjoy! If you're part of the regular Irish Film London audience or want to get more from your experience, consider joining our growing family of members for a range of exciting benefits. Irish Film London is a non-for-profit organisation. Our mission is to promote the best new Irish film to audiences all over the UK, and with the help of this podcast, the world. If you become a festival friend or a festival champion, you get perks like discounted tickets for films and events, free access to Irish Film from Home films, and invites to networking events, and so much more. So check it out now. Alrighty, hello and welcome to the director and cast of Doineann. Many thanks for coming on to chat to me today. I'm delighted to have so many of you, which is quite rare, so it's such a treat. I also do just want to say first and foremost that there might be a few spoilers in the chat, because sometimes you can talk about a film and kind of get through it without spoiling anything, but I think this is just too good not to talk about. And then the last thing I do want to say before we get stuck in is I've got basic Irish here. I'm like, it's Meallaigh Clare kind of vibe, so I'm going to pretend like I know anything like that in that regard. But what I do know is that it's a really, really great film. So I'm delighted to have you all on to chat about it today. So Damien, I'd love to start with you. Okay, so bring me right back to the start and kind of the birth of the film and how you first came across the script.
So before the script was there, I mean, I've been directing documentaries for about 14 years now, mostly in the Irish language. But I'd always a view towards making, feature drama, shorts, things like that. So I sort of started the process of putting a band together of, like-minded people who wanted to do, similar stuff as I had. And as part of that, a friend of mine put me in contact with the writer, Aisling Clarke, and it suggested that we would share common interests. And myself and Aisling got together and began discussing what we liked, what type of films we liked, and then began the process of discussing where the Irish language would feel natural in a story. And one of the things that came up kind of were recurring that we both were interested in was the idea of Ireland and island life and island culture and things like that. So I had a few island stories, and we discussed them with Aisling, and I suppose they kind of made up the genesis of the film. One of which I'm probably telling wrong. I've told it a few times, and I always imagine that I'm adding to it every time, and probably not even true anymore. But
you never let the truth get in the way of a good story,
exactly. Though. But it was about a guy who is from Belfast who built. I just heard this story secondhand. He built a holiday home on Tory Island. And he was staying in the house for a few weeks and was called back to the mainland to do a bit of work. And when he returned to Tory Island, the house was gone. And not only that, but all signs that there was ever a house, was completely vanished. So he went to the next door neighbour and he knocked on the door and he says, "Here, where did my house go?" And the neighbour says, "I never saw a house." So it was stories like that myself and Aisling began chatting about that kind of made up the genesis of what became the story of Doineann.
Amazing. And what was the how long was the process from kind of script to screen? Because sometimes these things can take years and other times it's just kind of head down and straight in.
Myself and Aisling had met long before there was notion, at that stage I didn't even know if there would be money, if there would be a fund. I think maybe Cine Cahir had just started going at that point. TG Cahir's have this drama scheme, which this wasn't part of, but the kind of notion of Irish language drama was just beginning. So I was starting the conversation. So we were maybe talking for about a year before a scheme called Gaeilge started through Northern Ireland Screen, and then we, as part of that process, it was maybe another year. So it could have been about 2.5 years between the moment we first sat down over a cup of coffee to the time that we were rolling on the very first day.
Right. Okay. And I'd love to ask all of you, I guess, kind of your relationship with the Irish language, because it can be so different for so many people, like either non-existent or like that really kind of prevalent in your childhood years, going to all Irish schools, and then it kind of slips away from you naturally without, when you're not using it. So I guess I'd love to start with Brid. What has been your journey with the Irish language, I guess?
Well, Niamh, I'm in the same corner as you. I have very little Irish. I was taught Irish at primary school and for a couple of years at secondary school. But it had all but vanished. I could say thank you and hello, but that was about it. But this came as completely out of the blue to me, this film. And when Damien spoke to me, I was actually traveling in Spain in 2020, and I had actually got a notion about that year doing a lot of traveling and just, taking it easy. When Damien spoke to me, I was in Spain, and I thought he'd possibly got me mixed up with somebody else, with Brennan. I thought he's a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, because I'm not known for my Irish. And so I was delighted, because then when I read the script, I just thought, well, this is just classic. And I felt I had to do it, although it was a daunting task, because I was going to have to just learn in Irish and not really know what I was saying. And so that was quite an experiment in acting as well, because it was almost like automatic acting in some sense, because I was much more concerned with getting the language right. And
of course,
from it, I just love the language now. I sort of struggled against it. And when I was at school, French was the language I spoke and loved, and imagined myself even years ago doing films in France in French. It was never going to happen. But lo and behold, I've done a film in Irish. And
never say never.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Seán, what about you? You Irish is quite a strong person in your life, Irish language, I guess.
Yeah, I've been very lucky to get to work quite a lot at Gaeilge. I suppose my relationship with Irish language going back is, it's not my first language. I do have some friends who I've met through Irish language projects who have Irish as their first language, and I think that's amazing that there are still people in this country whose first spoken language is Irish, and then they would have learned English at school after having spoken Irish for the first 4 or 5 years of their life. And there actually are still families who are raising their kids through Irish, but I think it's a huge challenge to do that, because there's so much English in the world around them. But anyway, I would have learned a bit of Irish at school. I'm originally from Donegal. We moved to Galway when I was about 8 or 9 or 10. And I spent maybe 4 years in an all-Irish primary school, from like 2nd class to 6th class, and then went to a non-Irish secondary school. So when I got to Leaving Cert, my Irish was kind of good enough, but it wouldn't have been I probably wasn't as good at 17 as it had been when I was 12, and I had just left the primary school, just kind of out of lack of use. And then early enough in my acting career, I got a chance to work in Russnaroon, and just being able to use the language frequently was a blessing. And it helped me, kind of like Brid, helped me fall in love with it. I suppose as a teenager, I would have spoken a bit of Irish to my dad if he spoke to me in Irish, but I would have been kind of quite resistant in the way that you are as a teenager to kind of anything that it comes at you from a parent. You're a bit like, no, I don't want to do that, even if you do. But yeah, I've been lucky enough to do a lot of projects at Gaeilge. A previous project actually with Peter when I first met him about 5 or 6 years ago, which was great crack. And I think TG Cahir have done a wonderful thing for the Irish language by sort of modernizing its image, and all the work they do with their documentary work to kind of preserve native speakers who might have passed away in the last 10 or 20 years. A lot of them have been included in documentaries or in drama series. Like I think of like films like Craine Killa, which was made in 2006, I think it was, and like a lot of the characters in that film would have been in their 60s or 70s. And a number of the actors have passed away since. So it's amazing to have that richness of the language, because that film was based on a book that was written, I think, in the 50s. And the richness of the language in the book is so unique that it was great to have those actors who would have had Irish as their first language to be able to sort of preserve it forever in film form. But yeah, like I think the work TG Carr is doing is great. The fact that there's a fund in Northern Ireland for Irish language projects as well is fantastic. And it's so great to see all the feature films now being made as Gaeilge and doing so well. And I think, like, I hope that the sort of resistance that exists in Irish society to the Irish language is loosening somewhat, and people can see those feature films like An Cailín Ciúin or Aracht or Roiseachas Frank, which is a kind of more recent one that's coming out, just to see them as films that happen to be in Irish, and not to sort of see that as a kind of a challenge, because we're so used to watching things with subtitles now.
Absolutely agreed, for sure. And Peter, Seán was saying there, obviously you guys have worked together in Irish language pieces before, and has it always been a thing in your life growing up, or did you kind of have to rework at it, or?
No, I went to all Irish primary school and secondary school, and I did a year in Ring in Ryan Guna when I was 12 as well. So I had pretty good Irish throughout my life. And then when I finished Closdown and went to UCD, I did study Irish, and I hadn't used it. I used various parts in Drama Sock. We did a version of translations, but the director did the Irish parts in Irish and the English parts in English. At the time, I didn't really agree with it, and at Friel's, the state wouldn't allow us bring it to festivals within the university drama circuit, because obviously they either did the full version Irish, full version English. Anyway, I digress. So I didn't do that much then until actually I did Aria Mahamu with Seán. So at that stage, I kind of had to go back. Yeah, I had to go back and listen to Radio na Gaeltacht and talk to my dad again on Gaeilge, which we do often but hadn't done for a while. So it was kind of a bit of a relearning of it at times, and now certainly when Doineann came along as well, I kind of have to put a bit more work in, and because this script was so good and the translation was superb, and we've said it before about like the idea of improvisation in various other films. This was a film that the script was so well put together and the characters were so well drawn out that you had to kind of make the language as natural as possible for yourself. So that took a bit of work. So I still adore the language. I'm not, like Seán says, I wouldn't be anywhere near as fluent as I was when I was younger, but it's still something that, you know, at the moment, there's an immense amount of pride around the films that they're making. As Seán said about TG Carr, with, you know, taking away their drama series for television and then being bold enough to make, 2 films a year as Gaeilge. And some of them have done so well. And I mean, I think it's only a matter of time before we get shortlisted for a foreign language feature in the Oscars. And I think that's the idea, and why not have those goals, you know? And I think the films that are being made, as I said before, are very much independent in the way they're put together, and also in the way that they're shot. So I think there's a great revolution happening with the Irish language film.
Absolutely. And I think, as you said, I think it's quite rare to be able to come across someone who is like really, really confident, fluent, because like that, like as we said, it just hasn't been used, or I think just appreciated in so long, and now it's kind of feels like it's really, really coming back, which is brilliant. And Claire, what about you? Or it was Irish kind of in your life growing up as well, the Irish language?
Not when I was young. I didn't go to a Gaeilge school or anything like that. I just had this particularly brilliant teacher for Leaving Cert, just by pure chance. And she just the way she spoke the language and the way she taught the language was just different to anyone I'd come across before, and she made me good at it. So that when it came to going to college and I was 16 filling out my CAO, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Well, actually, I wanted to go to drama school, but my parents wouldn't let me. So I was like, I have to go and get a degree. What will I get a degree in? I wanted to go to Trinity because Trinity's in town and town's cool. So I'll do Irish and sociology. Like, there was no other real thinking behind it apart from that. But I loved the Irish department, and I loved studying the language and just the community that was around it as well. I felt really at home there, because I mean, Trinity's a place where you can feel it maybe a little bit out of place if you're not minted.
How else can I say this?
Yeah. But I really found like an incredible community among the Irish speakers in the college, and and the Irish department was really small and felt kind of like a family. Like in the sociology department, if you were missing, nobody noticed. But if the Irish department, if you were missing, like someone was ringing you to see if you were okay, even if you were just in the pub or whatever. But so that's where my Irish came from, was studying in college, and I have to say, like, always, and this is no exception, always being surrounded by people who are much better at it than me, and who I can learn from. It was the case in college, and it was the case here as well. And just to reiterate everything that the lads were saying, that the fact that the quality of filmmaking Oscailga now is so high, it's just that beautiful thing, like, where you can go and watch a film and it doesn't matter that the film is in Irish. And I think like audiences have proven in the last few years, there's an appetite there for I think there was a real reticence before, like there was with the Irish language, to like subtitled films. But like, we all watched Parasite, we all watched Squid Game. There's no such block there anymore, I don't think. And maybe it was something that the industry thought was there that never was, but it's proven now that it can be hugely successful once the quality of filmmaking is as good as ours is.
Absolutely. And I think that's really special as well to mention, of having a really special teacher, because they can be quite hard to come across, especially in Irish language. I think sometimes it's struggled to kind of be taught properly. So that's
badass nun, Sis Louisa.
Oh, shout out, love it. So
and just to say as well, Niamh, sorry, yeah. Like it's funny, like I think a lot of Irish people have different relationships to the language, and some people sort of don't really encounter it at all once they leave school. But and like there will be a lot of people who actually maybe whose life is like that, who don't realize that it is still alive as a language. Like the fact that the films and stuff are being made now is kind of a reflection of that, rather than something that is trying to revive the language. I mean, obviously we're trying to increase the revival of the language, but it is very much alive. And like, because if I think about my own experience with it, like now, I probably would have, my friend group would be split 50-50 between the people that I would speak Irish with and people I would speak English with. And if I'm at home in Galway and I walk down the shop street and I meet someone I know, it's probably more likely that I would speak to them as Gaeilge than in English. Mm-hmm. So like, it's kind of, it's like, and I feel really lucky for that. I feel kind of sorry for people who don't have it as a living part of their everyday lives. But I think that the making of these films will hopefully kind of help increase that bubble, because it is a smaller, admittedly a smaller subsection of Irish society, but it is there very much.
Absolutely alive and kicking. And Brid, I'd love to ask, like you kind of just about touched on it there, but how did you find then your approach to this particular character, in the sense of, was it different to how you would usually approach any other things, aside from the fact that you had this new skill that you had to adapt to?
Well, it was completely different. It was almost like an experiment. I had enormous help from both Damien and from Orla Nacharney, who coached me in the scenes, just in the scenes. And I had a very strong idea of that woman, of Alicia. I had a strong idea and loved the character, obviously. So that's a good start if you really, really drawn to a character. But I did have to abandon some things that I would normally put in place, I suppose, is they sort of filter down to the bottom. And what became foremost for me was just getting the language out, getting it right. And the thing is, when you're not used to speaking a language, your jaw doesn't know how to do it, really. I think that's the feeling. It just doesn't know how to make the sounds in a natural, easy way. So you're learning to, so my concentration was all in that. And I worried about acting. I had obviously Damien, who was, very attentive and just great and supportive. But in some ways, in my head, after doing it for years, I think I just had to let that go. And I remember thinking, well, I'll see what happens. But the Irish was paramount for me, was actually trying to get it right and to sound right. And it was lucky for me that she wasn't a fluent Irish speaker, that she was a blow-in and had learned her Irish in that place, in that imagined place. So that sort of helped me a little bit, that I didn't have to be, a native Irish speaker.
Of course. Well, it's very, very impressive for someone who kind of went 0 to 100 into an Irish language speaking feature film. Very, very impressive.
Oh,
and just to give you, Niamh, and the listeners an idea of Brid's work ethic when it came to working on the film.
I was always in the pub.
The hotel bar / lobby, but it was a workspace. And we were all staying in the same hotel up in Belfast. And probably stayed there a little bit longer than we expected to for COVID reasons, etc. But like every night before the following day's work, Brid would be there either running scenes with Peter or with Claire or with myself or with Damien or with Orla, as you mentioned, who was the dialect coach. Like I literally spent hours and hours every evening just to make sure that she was as prepared as she could be for the following day's work. And that's not even to take into account all the work that she did pre-production that none of us were there to see. So her, like, I just would have to applaud her dedication to her craft and the complete, like I said, the work ethic, which was phenomenal, which we saw at firsthand.
Absolutely, because I think a lot of actors might even look at that and go, oh no, I couldn't, or that's too scary, or that's too big of a mountain to climb. So it's really, really impressive. And Claire, I'd love to ask you, I'd love to chat to you about your character, because she's quite complex and she's got quite a lot of layers. And when I first saw the trailer, I definitely thought we were kind of going down the path of the postnatal depression route. And being a new mom yourself, for the listeners who aren't lucky enough to see your little one on your lap like I can, was this an element to the character that you kind of wanted to explore in your research, maybe like working before your shooting?
Yeah, I think reading the script was such a joy to read about the character, and because at the beginning it can feel a bit like just reading the script, and like Niamh, the majority, unfortunately, of scripts that you get, if you even get to read the script, is like, I've auditioned for whore number 2, and that kind of crack, or you are somebody's wife, or you're somebody's girlfriend, or you're an appendage as opposed to a fully formed character. And that's so not the case here, even though I know that she disappears for a big chunk of the film, but she's so present. And that beautiful turnaround that Aisling does with seeing that entire scene play out from Peter's perspective to some degree, and then the flip side at the other end of the film, when we figure out what really was going on, really appealed to me as well, because it meant that when we were filming all those scenes, all of that was at play. And Damien was kind enough to send both me and Peter a book before we started about coercive control and about that kind of relationship and how it would potentially exist or play out in somebody's life, and that was really, really helpful. But I think as well that that all goes beforehand, but then I think, and the beauty of what we do is that you do all that prep work, and because there's nothing else you can do, I suppose, before, but just prepare or read, or I don't ever want to like learn the lines for months in advance, because I feel like then they'll lose all meaning, or but then after all that work, that when you're there on the day that you've done enough work that you can throw it all away. And really, particularly for this character and particularly for this film, she really, really needed to be so present in the moment, because everything that's happening is so immediate and so urgent. And just that question that you always ask yourself, either as a writer or an actor, like, why are we meeting this person today instead of any other day? And the day that we meet her is a serious day, like. But it was a real joy to get to play somebody, like you say, so complex and so well-rounded, even though she's not, present on screen as much as some of the other characters.
Exactly. And I think it was actually really refreshing in a way that it wasn't just that, oh yeah, here we have that story of, the new mom who's struggling after and et cetera, and it just kind of, it got more and more layered and complex as people are, as it went on, which was really, really lovely to watch. And Peter, I'd love to chat to you then about your journey with the film. So what kind of attracted you to the script? And then also then in regards to the character, I mean, like, can't imagine the easiest character to play. And how was your kind of journey with that, kind of going in and out of someone like that?
So I got the script, I think, just before lockdown, and I read it, the English version, and obviously originally Ashland's script, and I was blown away by it. It was a script that I couldn't put down, and also it was very Coen-esque, or, you know, to me, Nordic noir. There was a lot of all the stuff that I've watched over the years, everything from The Killing to all the various Coen brother films, the early Coen brother films like Blood Simple and well, not Barton Fink, but Blood Simple certainly. So there was just a brilliant images and great dialogue and well drawn out characters, and the Leisha character was just so intriguing as well for me to play opposite. And then the Tomas character, it was again, it was an interesting one, because I suppose I have played a lot of kind of thugs and stuff like that, so I'm constantly trying to kind of steer away from stuff like that. But you know, and at the end of this, obviously there's elements of that, but I think it was more interesting for me to kind of delve into someone like this character. It's very kind of frightening, and the book was quite eye-opening and quite scary at times, you know, to think that we live around those things happening every day. But I think it's a character, so you just kind of have to give it your intense attention for a certain amount of time. And Damien's book, which Claire mentioned, was very helpful. And we spoke at length, myself and Damien, throughout trying to analyze like the script and change the language. Orla was so helpful to kind of suit my Irish, because I'm a blow-in and I don't have, I speak good Irish, but you know, that's why what Brid did is just so astonishing, because she had the Donegal dialect, the Coonan, to learn on top of the Irish language, which I for any time I've ever gotten to be looking to play a part at Gaeilge, they've always given me a blow-in, because either they think I won't do it or whatever. But you know, that commitment to Shisha was just incredible. Yes, myself and Damien spoke at length about the character, where he came from, and also the idea of this. The interesting thing was the two different lives, the two people that we see. The person that, you know, to all intents and purposes in everyday life is a pillar of community, a pillar of society, and has won copious awards for all the work he's done with his investigative journalism and the TV series that he makes. So, you know, when he comes to an island like that, I think the idea was the examination of the ego, and how he comes here and buys himself a house at the highest point of the island, that looking down on everyone else. And the car he chooses to drive, the way he talks to the people, he doesn't enabor himself, and he distanced himself from everyone else. And I think the interesting thing was how the relationship had grown between him and his wife. And now that a child had come on the scene, how he still didn't see her as anything else but, you know, a part of his plan. So I think it was quite interesting to play both sides. And as Claire spoke about, that scene was one we talked about at length, and the whole character throughout the series, throughout the film, is talking to Damien about, you know, what are we doing now? Like, how are we playing him now? And so every day it was a good challenge. It was a demanding challenge to try and find which guy we're playing and which way we communicate with the other characters. But a lot of it was down to, as well, kind of with Leisha character, you know, his arrogance and his ego and his confidence in himself, that there's no way that anyone could kind of foil his plans. But once she came along, that was the really intriguing battle of wits between them.
Absolutely. And I think you did such a great job of, like, that you were talking about, kind of the different shifts in his character, but also it wasn't completely unbelievable either. You know what I mean? It wasn't kind of that, like, you know, it was definitely those really, when you think back to it then, being at the end of the film, you can kind of always see those kind of really underlying kind of traits, or, you know, that kind of thing, as opposed to it being just these two separate people. So it's not necessarily that he changes, I guess, as opposed to the perspective changes, which I thought was really, really well done. And Seán, your character is such a kind of strong gentle kind of character. You kind of just feel safe when he's on screen. So chat to me about your approach to him, and also then I guess as well, like what was his backstory and other layers to him that you had created in your head before playing him.
Well, kind of like what Peter said there. Peter talks about the fact that he kind of maybe gets cast as a lot of thugs and sort of tries to steer away from that. I tend to get cast as really holy characters. That seems to be my thing.
Oh.
Specifically St. Patrick. I've played 3 times to date. So it was really interesting for me, and I'm very grateful to Damien for the opportunity to play a character that certainly comes across as much more troubled and potentially dangerous, dodgy anyway. And so like my initial involvement, well, I did a casting in, I think it was maybe February 2020. And then I didn't hear anything back. So I assumed that, you know, it had gone another way, and then got word a number of months later saying, oh, that's still on, and they'd like you to play the role. And I was like, oh, great. Which is probably a bad precedent to be set for the rest of my acting career, because from now on, when I don't hear word back about auditions, I'll just be like, they probably postponed the shoot. That's what's going on. I actually do have the role. They just postponed the shoot. But then when we actually got down to, like, there was a bit of time between, I suppose, finding out that I had the role and then going to Belfast and doing it. So there were a couple of Zoom conversations with Damien, which were very helpful. And I suppose, like, the typical actor approach is to go, well, you know, the character that I'm playing is, you know, there has to be a reason behind everything that is in the character. So he comes across as someone, he's described actually by Peter's character as being, you know, of all the strange people on the island, he's the strangest. And I was keen, I'm sure Damien was the same, was keen to kind of find the reason behind that, the root of that, the way that he behaves. And I think Damien offered something that he had in his mind, which was that Macdara had a kind of a difficult enough childhood with an abusive father who maybe was abusive either to him or to his mother. So he's sort of seen that dynamic, that power relationship from a very close standpoint. And then obviously he has encountered Claire's character and sees the way that Peter's character carries on, and it kind of doesn't take to him at all. So that kind of that explains his kind of coldness towards Thomas, Peter's character, but also I think it gives a bit of a reason to the fact that he as a character is very kind of closed off. For I think the majority of the film, he's actually quite standoffish and not really being 100% honest with anyone that he encounters. Even Bridget's character, Leisha, when she comes down to question him, even though he's done nothing wrong, he is still very evasive because of what he's trying to protect, by the fact that the Claire's character is actually staying in his house. Spoiler alert. But then it's nice to kind of touch on what's really going on with him in that last scene, I suppose one of the last scenes that I have with Bridget's character. So it's like, yeah, it's and I suppose in a somewhat similar way to what Claire mentioned, like Macdara isn't really on screen all that much, but he's mentioned in a number of scenes that he's not on screen, so he kind of feels like a bigger presence. And I think that's probably reflects well on the script, because you really kind of feel like you get to know the different characters, even though not all of them are on the screen the whole time. And yeah, so it was good, great enjoyment to get a chance to play it, really.
Absolutely, he feels really present throughout it, and the same with Claire's character as well. And Damien, we've briefly chatted about it there, but you know, the success of language films abroad over the last while, like Claire was saying, mainly Korean with Parasite, Minari and Squid Game and all that kind of stuff. And now kind of with the surge of Irish language films, it feels like we're kind of on the cusps of something like what Peter was saying. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be, you know, up with the top dogs quite soon. And do you think that with the momentum behind Irish films at the moment, where do you kind of see the wave going, or is there anything that needs to happen in order to kind of keep the momentum?
Well, it's very exciting to be a part of it, even if it is a small part of it. I still think, you know, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of different genres that we could be tackling. only by doing that and trying out different styles of films and genres of films will we find our voice, I think. So, you know, I hear a few people saying it's the golden age of Irish language cinema. I think it's just the beginning. You know, I think in 10 years' time it'll be, you know, something completely different. And, you know, the films that are mentioned, say for example Parasite, you know, Bong Joon-ho was making films for 15 years before he got to Parasite, and I hope that's the way it'll progress, that we'll start to find our voices as we go along. But you know, it's really exciting to be a part of it, and it's really exciting to have made a genre film. You know, the thing that they always say is that, you know, film should be like a mirror, it should reflect you, you know, and my interests are thrillers, my interests are, you know, horror, my interests are genre films. I also happen to be an Irish speaker, so I kind of want to see that reflected in the films that get made. So in a way, we're sort of creating a bit of a blueprint at the minute, and we'll maybe get some things wrong, you know, but there's a phrase in Irish, Derera Kayla Hogtar Cashlin, which means bit by bit castles are built. And I do see that's the way it's going.
Absolutely. It's very, very exciting. And Brid, I'd love to chat to you about Alicia for a little bit. What was it about that character that you really enjoyed exploring? She kind of gave me that kind of, you know, Sarah Lancaster Happy Valley vibe, you know, that kind of under a really chill kind of detective, but just taking it all in at the time. What was it about her that you really loved exploring?
Well, I again, thanks to Damien, he also sent me a book, and it was something, again, because it's so minimal, the film, quite existential in a way. It's great to have the ballast of a backstory for yourself, or some ideas of how that woman Alicia ended up as a guard, ended up on that island. And Damien had sent me a very interesting book, a true story of a band Garda who had been treated very badly by, this is quite a few years ago, she got pregnant, been treated very badly by the actual institution, or the Garda institution. And so that was a reason to some way to going to explain possibly why that woman ended up on the island, why she had retired. For some reason, she'd ended up there and she was happy to stay there, or she wanted to stay there. I just like the idea of her strong character, but I'd read a book not long before that by a Polish writer called Olga Tokarczuk, called Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. And there's a wonderful character in there, a central character, woman, who's very much her own woman, eccentric and very much, and I'm very, very drawn to that type of a character. And there was a film made of that book. But when I saw the script, I thought, oh, this is, you know, this will be something like that. Drive your plow over the bones of the dead. It's not really like it, but it's that type of a character. And those people always appeal to me. People who are outliers, or people who are just on the outside of society in some way or other, but are not afraid. So I see her as being a courageous woman, and that's always attractive. To me, that sort of courage. And also she's quite at home with her solitude, and I like the idea of that as well. And being on an island also appeals to me, and she seems to have embraced that solitude of the island. And but also her cunning. She's cunning, and her intelligence, and she was, I think, initially prepared to go along with Tomas in some ways, but she's watching. She's always watching. And I also, all of these things I love in a character, the watchfulness, and being her own counsel. She hasn't got anybody else. And all of these things, you know, add up to being, to me, a very attractive character to play.
Absolutely. I think it's like, because the kind of shift in, you know, the decision that she kind of makes in the end with Siobhan is it's quite a big one, you know, to make, but she kind of just seems to do it with such ease of just like, no, this is what, you know, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing. Yeah. And it's a really, really interesting part of that character.
I agree with you. And it's crucial really in the end, because, you know, it is the difficulty you set out with is the disappearance of a person on an island. It has all those sort of geographical potentials, how does that person disappear on an island? Of course, there's a sea all around, so that's you know, an obvious exit. But that idea of how she, and again, the book that Damien sent me really helps with this. As a person who'd, the character in the book Damien sent me was a person who joined the Garda with the best of faith, wanting to help people, wanting to do good. And then she hit a wall of, well, yes, you know, the patriarchy, that's the wall she hit. And so I quite like the idea that on that island, she accesses her own sense of justice. And I thought about this because I thought about Synge's play, Playboy of the Western World, and how that story comes from Inishmaan, you know, the middle of the Three Highlands, where it actually happened, the story that Synge used, and how the man who turns up arrives from Kerry or wherever, having killed his father, that the islanders shelter him. And I was once in a production that the Druid did of Playboy of the Western World. And I think we were the first time ever that play was taken to Inishmaan and Inishmore. But in Inishmaan, it was the most wonderful experience of my life in theatre. It was just superb. And I think somebody had interviewed one of the islanders about, you know, what they felt about that they'd sheltered, their ancestors had sheltered this man. And this person said, well, I suppose they would have thought he'd suffered enough with his remorse. And to me, that was a sort of island justice. Or I was intrigued by that idea that, and because nobody's really going to be able to find out about it. But what she felt, that woman felt, Leisha felt, was that she had to at all costs. She believed Claire's character and that she had to protect her and the child.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that, Claire, that scene with you and Leisha's, I think your performance is so beautiful and understated as well. And it's such a sad reality for a lot of women and men. And, you know, do you think was it really important to you that for Siobhan's story to be dealt with in a really gentle way, but also be heard very loud?
Yeah, I mean, like reading that book obviously I was aware of the whole concept of coercive relationships or whatever. What was the term you used for your character, Peter and Damien?
No, narcissistic. What was it again, Peter? It was
oh God.
Anyway, it'll come back to the
covert
aggressive. Yeah.
Covert aggressive. Yeah. And the idea that and like Peter said, the idea that kind of relationship is playing out all around us, completely unbeknownst to us. And the fact that that type of aggression, that type of constant undermining of a person can be so completely covered up and completely hidden from the rest of the world. And also the idea, I think I just really related to Siobhan, not because I'm in a covert aggressive relationship, but because even getting into her mindset of that one scene, like that, and the way he's so kind to her, so kind in his constant just chipping away at her reality, and the fact that he's removed her away from everybody so that she doesn't have anybody else to check in with about what real is. So it was really, really completely understand, because I think oftentimes you can watch an abusive relationship on screen, whatever kind of abuse it is, and you can feel like that will never be me. I would never stand for that. I would never allow somebody to treat me that way. But I think when you look at Siobhan, I think the really undermining or the really unsettling thing about that is that could totally be me. That could be anyone, you know, because she fell in love with this man. She, you know, when you fall in love with somebody, you give them a certain amount of yourself, and then he just took that and he really, really messed with it. Like, so yeah, so I just think that the fact as well that the abuse itself isn't the center of the film, or it isn't like the point of the film, and the film's, you know, it's just an element of it. It's not, I don't feel like it's a film about abuse, actually, really. It's a thriller, and it's really, really, like, for want of, it's entertaining as well as And I think that's the thing as well, that you're not hitting your audience over the head with anything. You're telling a story, and this happens to exist within it. And that's what I love about great writing. And this is like for Mash, and this is great writing, because you're not telling your audience how to think or feel. You're letting them figure it out as they go. And that's so enjoyable as an audience member, not to be spoon fed. That was such a load of tangents, but I think
it was perfect. But I think also it was like exactly as you said, I think it's harder to see, so it's also more important to share and talk about. Like you really don't see relationships like that on screen or TV, and they should be shown and talked about more for sure. So it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was premiered in Galway this summer just past?
Yes, it was in Galway in July, just last year there, yeah.
And was that the first time you all saw it, or had you seen it separately?
Well, it was, we were online for that. It was still part of the hybrid festival. Only a couple of things were screened. So the first time that we all sat together and watched it, there was a screening here in Belfast for the Belfast Film Festival. In the Odeon in Belfast. So that was the first time we all went out for dinner and then went to watch it. I think it was the first time Peter ever watched it, which was terrifying for me and sure terrifying for him. But
bad decision in hindsight.
I could think, imagine he doesn't like it. What would happen? Just storming out, wait for him getting up and walking halfway through. But we sent a link to the guys so that they had the opportunity to watch it if they wanted beforehand, and 3 of the 4 took it up, and Peter decided to crazily wait until there were 400 people in the room.
And then go do a Q&A directly afterwards. We're still trying to process it.
Couldn't.
In the moment.
The worst mistake. As you get older, it's grand when you're younger because you're excited with the idea of watching yourself. But now when you get older, you're just analysing your performance by inch. So, and in front of 400 people, you're just like, and then they're asking you questions, like, give us some concise answers. You're like, I'm just very proud, and it felt like crying.
Still processing it yourself.
Yeah.
And we briefly kind of chatted about the island there. So Damien, it was chat to me about where it was shot, and did you come into? You also, I think Seán as well mentioned COVID as well. Was there a beast there at some point, whether the weather on the island or COVID itself, or what was the shooting process like?
I'm always reluctant to talk about COVID because
I know
it's not so bad, but yeah, I mean, we were shut down twice. Now, what I would say is no one ever got sick. We were very thankful that no one got sick, but we were stopped twice. The first time was for 2 weeks, and then we got up and running again for 1 day, and then we were shut down again. So we were actually shut down longer than we were up running, which was quite the ratio. We shot for 18 days, but we spent, I would say, a good, what was it, about 36 months in the hotel or something like that, just going slowly mad. It actually was like The Shining. It was the 5 of us in the Stormont Hotel in Belfast, and Barry McGuigan randomly, the boxer. So it was just the 6 of us. But look, it's obviously very stressful. It was very tough, but you got to take the positives out of it too. It gave us more opportunity to, as Seán had said there earlier, the guys were able to run the script with each other, get to know the Irish and the lines, and get to run and rerun it. But also it gave us an opportunity to get to know each other, which I think is very important. It's maybe not spoken about as much, but just being able to go into a shoot day and have confidence in each other, and that friendly relationship pays off in dividends. You develop a shorthand, and particularly for me, I have to say, as a first time drama director, it was hugely important to me that I had a core cast of 4 that were very supportive, and that was all developed through downtime due to COVID. So if there was one positive, and there literally only was one positive, then that was it.
But no positive test results, which is good.
Well,
I think that was I think that was really, you could see that though, that although being on an island, which can be very isolating and quite lonely, you did get that sense that you all, you were all aware of each other and knew each other on the island, and kind of knew that that's like that with Siobhan and McDara, that they had each other, even if they weren't calling in for cups of tea, that kind of a relationship. It was definitely that kind of energy. And
I think it pays off with the crew as well, because you've got a crew there. They're not there for the money on low budget features like this. They're there for the love of the project, and you become like one big family in a way, and there, the nice thing, there was no disconnect between cast and crew. We were all, everyone was just kind of getting stuck in. Now, there was this thing where, us five were isolated together in the hotel, but anytime an actor, one of the guys walked into a room, some of the crew had to leave, which was really, which was really embarrassing because, the
every
first
time we walk into a room, someone would go, "Red's out! Red's out!" And all the crew would have to whistle out. It's like, "I'm sorry."
And the cast would be coming.
The talent is here.
Yeah.
Was
leave the room.
Want to be in the same room as them, we were making them leave, but we were.
And Damien, what's the journey now for Doineann? Because I know it's already been on TV as well, which is brilliant. And so, what's the kind of journey looking for it?
Well, we because of COVID and because it was pushed back by 6 months, we sort of bumped up against the it's primarily funded by the Irish Language Broadcast Fund here, which is part of Northern Ireland Screen, but also two broadcasters, TG Ceathair and BBC Gaeilge here. So we kind of bumped up against the date we'd agreed to broadcast. So, but we got a theatrical window, and it did really well. It was scheduled here in Belfast, for example, in the Queen's Film Theatre, which is a theatre I've grown up in. I've seen hundreds of films in it. So the fact my own film was in it was such a trip, But it was scheduled to be on for 7 days, and such was the demand that it actually ended up on for 14 days. And from what I'm told, it was like at least 3/4 full every night. So for an Irish language, low budget film, it was great. And then outside of theatrical run, it's been, I was in Chicago 2 weeks ago with it, and I've just got back from Canada this morning. We were in Toronto with it. And, to sit in a room with audiences, which again, we weren't sure we would ever, when we were filming, there was a real fear that it would never end up in a cinema, due to COVID, and would people be allowed to assemble again in those numbers. But it's just been such a great experience. Chicago, there were so many people there for Chicago that they had to put on a spillover room.
That's amazing.
It was great. And audiences, the such is the story, and the quality of the acting in the film, that a lot of people say that even though it's in Irish, they forget that within 10 minutes, and they kind of lose themselves in the story. And when I first started hearing that, I was thinking, well, hold on a minute, that kind of defeats the purpose. But at the same time, it's lovely. A lot of people have been saying, look, it's the first time they've ever heard Irish, the Irish language. It helps to normalize it. It helps to, one of the things about making TV docs that I always loved is that you just put the Irish language in people's front rooms, whether they wanted it there or not. They turned on the TV and there was the Irish language heard. And it's something similar with this, to bring it to Chicago and to bring it to Toronto and places that might not have otherwise be heard. It's just been a great experience. It's been a great experience. It's been really, really great.
Oh, that's fantastic. And for any listeners who haven't seen it yet, silly people who haven't seen it yet, where can they check it out, or where would they keep an eye out to try and catch it?
Well, at the minute they can get it on the TG Ceathair player. And also, if they're in the north, they can get it on the iPlayer as well. So there's two options. There's a whole all Ireland coverage there of the film.
Fantastic. So the last little bit, with the nature of the podcast at Irish Film London, I like to ask my guests if there has been a film in their life that's had some sort of big impact. I don't like saying favorite film because that sounds very generic, but a film that might have had an impact in your life, or your favorite Irish film. And Brid, you can't say one that you've been in, and Peter, and you have to think of other ones.
Wait, did you say, sorry, that I'm not allowed to say Doineann? Is that what you said?
We all know, of course, that's the one, but other than those, yeah. Seán, I'll start with you. What about you?
It's very hard to pick a favorite film, but I suppose there's a film that I'll sort of never forget my response to, because I actually remember watching it, and it wasn't even in cinema, it was in a friend's sitting room. We were watching on DVD, and I remember saying wow out loud a couple of times. It was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and I just loved the story of it, both in terms of like kind of the sort of, I don't know, the philosophical point of view, but also the way that it was done. Michel Gondry likes to do lots of his kind of special effects in camera, so like they didn't kind of, it wasn't CGI stuff, and I really love practical effects and kind of that sort of stuff, so that's something that's amazing. And if anyone hasn't seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, definitely go and see it. Go and see it, find it and watch it. In terms of Irish films, there are a clatter of Irish films that get loads of attention. I wouldn't say maybe this is my favorite Irish film, because I don't know if I could pick one, but an Irish film that I loved was a documentary called The Farthest, which was about the Voyager telescope. And it was just so well done. Emer Reynolds directed it, and it was just like a fascinating story. And I suppose like my background is in, I liked mathematics and science subjects when I was in secondary school, and I did engineering in college. So I'm kind of very much into that sort of, end of things. But like this documentary, they interviewed people who were involved in sending the telescope up into space that's still going, and was kind of a very, important moment for space discovery and that kind of thing. But were all able to present the story in a very understandable way for anyone, while still retaining a passion for what they'd done back in I think it was the 70s. So like, and it's a beautifully made documentary. And I was lucky enough to see it during the Dublin Film Festival in Screen 1 in the Savoy, which was a fucking huge screen that is sadly no longer around. And I was about 3 minutes late coming into the screening, so I had to sit in like the third row, and there were times where I felt like I was in space. I was that close to the screen. It's brilliant. It's definitely worth seeking out and watching on the biggest screen you possibly can. That's The Farthest.
Amazing, brilliant. And Peter, what about you?
Right, this is a very hard one. I was actually, one film that comes to mind before I had children. I used to just be able to walk into town randomly on a Wednesday or Tuesday and pick a film that I didn't know anything about in the iPlayer and watch it. And I saw a film by a director called Chloe Bernard. It's The Selfish Giant. It was an interpretation of the Oscar Wilde story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Someone correct me if I'm right. Yeah, Brid. And it was just an astonishing piece of film. It's about two young boys. One is from a traveller community, and another one from a kind of broken background. Anyway, it's just, she's an incredible director, and she did a film recently as well called Dark River with Ruth Wilson. And anyway, that selfish giant was something that struck me for its beauty and its simplicity, and also the telling of a story of a difficult childhood. And it's one of those films that rung true with me. And then from an Irish standpoint, I suppose one that affected me when I was younger was probably I Went Down, which was directed by Paddy Brannock, which was written by Conor McPherson. And it's Peter MacDonald and Brendan Gleeson. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it is an absolute belter. It's just comedy gold. It's a kind of a spaghetti western. There's some Tony Doyle is in it, Michael McCann. There's a couple of brilliant turns. And one of Brendan's, I think, first films that kind of put him out there. So that was incredible. And then after that, I suppose Mark O'Rourke's Intermission as well. That was quite a astonishing film at the time. I think that there's humor and drama and darkness in both of them. So they're my choices.
Brilliant. My list is just getting longer and longer and longer. This is great. Damien, what about you?
In terms of films, I'm going to be really obvious and say Jaws, but simply because it was the first time, as a kid, realizing that there was a director, that there was someone sort of manipulating how you felt, and you could sort of feel how it was put together, and the shark and the music and all that sort of stuff. And also, I still, you still get something new from it every time. I'm being a child of Amblin as well, all the Spielberg stuff, I love all that. And then for Irish films, I'm going to give a shout out to one that's in the cinema at the minute, if that's all right, called Young Plato. It's a documentary about Holy Cross Boys School and about a headmaster there who's teaching the kids philosophy, and it's on wide release at the minute, and I just sat crying the whole way through it. I'm not embarrassed to say that. And it's just a beautiful bit of work. Anthony Coonan and Declan McGrath's documentary.
Brilliant. I'm definitely going to check that out. Peter, did you want to say something there?
No, I heard that teacher being interviewed on the radio recently. So I'm delighted to hear that that's in the cinema. Yeah, he's an inspirational teacher.
Yeah,
what's the teacher's name again?
Kevin Oh, jeepers, you've put me on the
Yeah.
spot. I can't remember
Anyway,
now, but he's incredible. He's a real charismatic character. But in a way, it's not really, it's when you're into it, it's not really about the philosophy. It's about how the kids respond, and it pushes them to think about their actions and things like that, and just the responses you get out of it. It's an incredible bit of work, really beautiful bit of work.
Oh, brilliant. Well, then, speaking about inspirational teachers, Claire, what about you? What are yours?
Well, Peter robbed mine. My favorite Irish film is Intermission, and I think it was probably the first time I ever went to the cinema and thought that I could be in movies. If like that, like, not that I'm Colin Farrell or anything, but you see actors like who just sound like you is revolutionary for a young person to go to and be like, oh, it's not just American people who get to make movies. Like we get to make movies, and they get to be really good, and like and I get to recognize places and recognize voices and recognize humor in a way that feels like it was made specifically for me, in a way that I don't think I'd ever felt before in a cinema. And Mark, I just adore Mark's writing, both for stage and screen. I think he's a genius. And my favorite movie of all time is The Muppets Christmas Carol.
Oh yeah, classic.
Because it's pure joy, and it is that thing that I love in all writing, that it's a simple story beautifully told, and the best thing about it is the fact that Michael Caine gives what I think should have been an Oscar-winning performance alongside a load of Muppets, and not once has he ever. He's 100% dedicated to
it's
that.
Very impressive. It's really, really impressive, and you get completely lost in it. Your first 2 minutes, you're in it. It's so great, gorgeous. And Brid, what about you? Finally, what are your two?
Well, like Damien, I spent a long time in the QFT at Queen's when I was studying there, and it was one of the few remaining cinemas left in Belfast at the time. When so many others had been bombed and were no longer in existence. And it was a wonderful escape to go to see stuff. And I saw so many different types of films. But I suppose one of the films that's really stayed with me is 400 coups, Truffaut's 400 Blows. I just find it perfect as a film. And that whole thing started my love of French cinema in particular, but I'd also seen some amazing stuff when I was a student at Queen's, including Andrei Rublev, Tarkovsky. All of these things were amounted to being very influential. I know you're not allowed to say these things, but if about a film that you're in, but Irish film-wise, I was in a film years ago in Ireland, and as far as I know, that was the first all-Ireland funded film. Irish crew, all Irish actors, and it was made in Roscommon on a very small budget, shot by Thaddeus O'Sullivan and directed by Pat Murphy. And it was a feminist film, and of that I'm incredibly proud that way back then that Pat was making feminist films. And so I'm going to have to say that is my favorite for all those reasons.
And what was the name of it?
And Devlin. And Devlin. Yeah.
Amazing. That is brilliant. That's so great. But I'd just like to say thank you so much for all of you to come on, extended family included. I really, really appreciate you all taking the time to come on and chat to me, and we wish you all the best with all of your future successes, and we hope to have you on again very, very soon. And at Irish Film London, hopefully we will see you all very soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Niamh.
Thanks a million.
Thanks. And that's it for this week's interview. Thank you all so much for listening. We hope you really enjoyed it. Thank you to Culture Ireland and the Irish Emigrant Support Programme. Myself and Jerry will be back in a fortnight with a brand new interview. See you then.